Great, thank you. So this is about animal welfare in the wild and in animals under human care. And I will divide my talk into these four main sections. So I like to start by discussing why I think we should care about animal welfare when we do what we do. So working with wild animals, either in the wild or under human care. Then I will discuss the concept of animal welfare and how we can assess it using both behavior and physiology. And then I like to discuss this issue of what can we learn from each other. And by this, I mean that some of us work with wild animals in nature, some work with wild animals under human care. And I believe that we both can learn a lot from each other, particularly when it comes down to animal welfare. And after this, I will end up with a summary. So, okay, so why animal welfare? Now, I like to suggest that in our situation, animal welfare is important for two different reasons. One is that there is a clear link between animal welfare and human welfare. The other reason is that we have a moral responsibility towards animals. But let me elaborate first on the first issue, the link between animal welfare and human welfare. Now, I think that working with wild animals, animal welfare has an impact on human welfare through two different ways. One is that better welfare will help conservation. And the other one is that when we do scientific research, better animal welfare will improve the quality of the data we get. Particularly, I will argue, it will increase the validity of the data and the extent to what that data is applicable to a wide range of animals. Now, let me say something more about the links between animal welfare and conservation. Now, I think that traditionally, welfare and conservation have been seen as two different, independent, if not opposite things. Animal welfare clearly has a focus on the individual animal, whereas conservation has a focus on the population. And because of this, and also because of some other reasons, for many years, there has been a lack of dialogue between people doing conservation and people doing welfare. I think we should be over this now, and I like this paper very much. I mean, it has 10 years already. It's by David Fraser, one of the leading scientists in the field of animal welfare, a Canadian scientist, and basically what he says is that animal welfare and conservation are two sides of the same coin, and the reason why he says that is this: poor welfare, which, as we shall see later on, is very often linked to chronic stress, may reduce population size. And this is because chronic stress, among many other effects, may have a negative impact on reproductive success of the animals. So poor welfare in free-ranging wild animals may contribute to a reduction of the size of the population. But the opposite is also true, because it happens that many conservation problems cause suffering in animals. So they are also welfare problems. So think, for example, about bycatch and injury and stress caused by entanglement, and stress caused by noise in marine mammals. We all recognize that these are conservation issues, But if we think from the perspective of an individual animal, these animal welfare as issues as well. So I think it doesn't make any sense to consider that there is a conflict between welfare and conservation. I think that much on the contrary, as David Fraser suggests, both things are two aspects of the same problem, basically. Now, the second reason why animal welfare is important for us, I mean, many of us are doing research, or all of us are doing research with, say, animals in under human care or animals in the wild, and we do a variety of research, cognition, behavior, physiology, and so on. Now, the question which many scientists have been discussing for some time, mainly in the context of more traditional laboratory animals such as rats and mice, is whether when we improve the welfare of our experimental animals, we also contribute to the quality of the data we get. And I like this paper very much. The senior author is a Swiss scientist, Hanno Burbel. He has been looking for quite a while into environmental enrichment of lab rodents. For many years, scientists doing research with lab rodents were very skeptical about implementing environmental enrichment strategies. They did recognize that this could improve the welfare of the animals, but on the other hand, they were concerned because they thought that by implementing environmental enrichment strategies, they will reduce the homogeneity of the lab animals and increase the variability of the results. Now, have been several papers, and this is basically a review that mainly show the opposite. They show that by providing better welfare conditions to the animals, the results we get are applicable to a wider range of animals. And if you think of that, it is basically a common sense, which is now supported by data. Now, imagine that we are doing research with animals which are sick or distressed or show abnormal behavior. The results we obtain may well be applicable only to animals in those conditions, but that is not what we want. We would like to have results which are applicable to a normal, healthy animal. And I think that most of us, if not all of us, would be skeptical if we are given results obtained with a clearly sick, injured animal. We would say, well, okay, that's applicable to animals with this particular sickness, but is not applicable to healthy animals, to the general population. And I think we should expand this concept to other issues that go beyond physical health. So results obtained in chronically stressed animals may well be applicable to other animals which are also chronically stressed, but not to the general population of animals, which hopefully will include mainly animals which are healthy and not under chronic stress. So basically, just to recap, I think that besides our moral responsibility towards animals, which I will discuss now, welfare is important for us who work with wild animals and do research for two practical reasons. One, welfare is closely linked to conservation. And secondly, by improving animal welfare, we also improve the quality of the data we get because we increase the validity of that data. Now, the second reason why I think animal welfare is important, as I said before, has to do with our moral responsibility towards animals. Now, I will not expand on this very much. I guess we all agree with that we have a responsibility towards the animals we use. But I like to reflect on one particular aspect of this issue. I think it is fair to say that many philosophers would agree with the fact that our moral responsibility towards animals is contingent upon the fact that animals are sentient beings. And by sentient, I mean they are able to experience affective states or emotions. They are able to suffer and to experience a wide array of emotions. Now, if that is the case, then it follows that we be concerned about the welfare of all sentient animals. And that raises an interesting point, because even though there is still some discussion and the debate is not over, I think it is a fair summary to say that many neurophysiologists today would agree that in this category of sentient beings, we include all vertebrates and also some invertebrates as well, mainly some cephalopods. And this is, for example, summarized by the Cambridge Declaration, which, among many other things, says that the absence of a well-developed cerebral cortex doesn't preclude animals from being sentient. And as you can see in the last sentence of this fragment of the declaration, it says non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, and many other species, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates that are needed for sentience. So, and I guess that's important because this reasoning and this argument applies to fish as well. So basically, beyond the philosophical aspect, I think that if we try to join philosophy and ethics with neuroscience, the conclusion we should reach is that if we care about animal welfare, we should care about the welfare not only of mammals, but also of all vertebrates, including fish, and some invertebrates as well. And one point for discussion is that if we would be having this webinar, say 10 or 20 or 50 years ago, probably we would be saying that sentience is just exclusive of mammals or even of some mammals. And then we expanded that to birds and to other vertebrates. And now we are considering that some invertebrates are also sentient. So the point I want to get to is that we are basically enlarging the number of animals that we think are sentient and therefore deserve some moral consideration. Okay, so so far the first point, why animal welfare? So a practical reason, the link with human welfare, and then this moral responsibility, which is linked to sentience. And remember, now we accept that sentience goes well beyond mammalian species. Okay, so my second point is, what is animal welfare? So we agree, or let us assume that we agree that animal welfare is important. But what are we talking about when we talk about animal welfare? First idea is that the concept of animal welfare is not equivalent to the concept of physical health. By physical health, I mean absence of disease and injury. Now, all welfare scientists would agree that welfare is a wider concept than physical health, because it includes physical health, yes, but also the emotional state of the animal. And traditionally, the emphasis in animal welfare research has been on avoiding the negative, avoiding suffering, avoiding pain, chronic stress, avoiding poor welfare in general. However, more recently, animal welfare is seen as the balance between positive and negative emotions. So promoting positive emotional states is at least as important as avoiding the negative aspects of animal welfare, avoiding negative emotions. So remember this, we are talking about something which is quite wide, much wider than the traditional idea of physical health, understood as the absence of disease and injury, because we include emotions as a very substantial part of animal welfare. Actually, some scientists would argue that welfare is about the emotional state of the animal, about the balance between positive and negative emotions. Now, we all agree also that assessing or identifying or measuring emotions in animals is difficult, and therefore we suggest that when we assess welfare, we must include different elements to get an overall picture of the welfare of the animals. And these different elements have been forward very clearly again by David Fraser in a seminal paper. He says that when looking at animal welfare, we should look at three different elements or components, which he calls biological functioning, emotions, and behavior. Now, by biological functioning, we mean, if you want, the more physical aspects of animal welfare, such as absence of disease and injury, comfort, both thermal and physical comfort, and feeding. Now, by emotions, we mean this balance between positive and negative emotions. And by behavior, we basically mean the possibility that the animal may perform those behaviors which are important for its welfare. And I will go back to this later on. I think that a rather common misunderstanding when dealing with the welfare of animals, particularly the welfare of animals under human care, a common misunderstanding is to believe or to state that to guarantee good welfare, animals should be able to perform all the natural behavior patterns. And we don't have any evidence for that. We do know, however, that among all the different behavioral patterns of one given species, there are a few which in traditional behavioral sciences we used to call behavioral needs. There are a few behavioral patterns which are indeed important for the welfare of the animal. Now, anyway, to make a long story short, remember welfare going beyond physical health because it includes emotions. As emotions are very often difficult to measure, we have to look to welfare using a multidimensional approach that includes biological functioning, so health, feeding, comfort, emotions, and behavior, considering that not all behaviors, but some of them, what we call behavioral needs, are important for the welfare of the animals. Now, this multidimensional approach of animal welfare has been summarized recently by Mellor, a scientist from New Zealand, in the 5 domains model. Maybe some of you are familiar with the 5 freedoms, which were put forward by the British Farm Animal Welfare Council many years ago. For a long time, the 5 freedoms have been the working definition of animal welfare. Now, recently, the 5 freedoms are seen as being outdated and have been replaced by this model, the 5 domain model, which is now the working definition of animal welfare. So this model conveys a very nice, easy idea, and the idea is that it is the last domain, the 5th one, the mental state domain, the one which defines the welfare of the animal. Remember what I said before, welfare is, at the end of the day, probably and mainly the balance between negative and positive emotions. So this mental state domain defines the welfare of an individual. However, because emotions are difficult to access, to measure, we have to infer the emotions that animals are experiencing, looking at the 4 domains which are more easy to measure. So nutrition, environment, health, and behavior. And thinking behind this approach is that from each of these four measurable domains, nutrition, environment, health, and behavior, a number of positive and negative emotions may arise, and the overall combination of all these emotions is what constitutes the fifth domain, the mental state, which defines the welfare of the animal. Now, an interesting application of this approach, the five-domain approach, is that it has been used as the basis for welfare assessment protocols, which I'm going to discuss in this next section. Okay, so far we have seen the importance of animal welfare. We have seen as well the concept of animal welfare and this five-domain approach. Let us see how animal welfare can be assessed using a scientific approach. Now, obviously, assessing animal welfare is important. Excuse me. Is important to identify problem areas and also to monitor progress when improvement strategies are being implemented. So we need tools to assess animal welfare, and we need tools that allow us to assess welfare using objective science-based indicators. Now, in the animal welfare literature, people usually distinguish between two different types of indicators, what we call resource-based indicators and what we call animal-based indicators. Now, the idea is very simple. Imagine you want to assess the welfare of dolphins under human care. You could look at the size of the pool, water temperature, whether you have environmental enrichment in place, the diet you give to the animals. So you can look at a vast array of things except the animals. If you did that, you would be looking at resource-based indicators. Now, the other possibility, the opposite one, would be that you forget about everything but the dolphins. And you look at body condition, you look at physiology, you look at injuries, you look at behavior, and so on. So you have resource-based, everything but the animals, or animal-based indicators, behavior, physiology, health, and so on. Now, an important aspect is that traditionally, animal welfare assessment has been based on resource-based indicators. Now, if you are familiar with the zoo animal welfare literature, and you think about husbandry guidelines, for example, basically those husbandry guidelines give indications about size of the facilities, diet, temperature, substrate, and so on. So that's the traditional approach. But recently, the evidence is showing in a very compelling way that this traditional approach of looking at the environment may not be the best way to assess the welfare of the animal. And this is mainly for two different reasons. One is that each feature of the environment may have a different effect on the welfare of the animal based on the individual characteristics of the animal. For example, one animal with a very bold temperament may react positively to an environmental enrichment program, whereas a very shy animal may show fear and chronic stress when you implement environmental enrichment or some environmental enrichment strategies. So the temperament and the individual characteristics of the animals will have an effect on how a given environmental variable impact the welfare of the animal. So it is difficult to predict what the welfare is going to be if you just look at the environment. And the other problem is that very often environmental variables interact with each other when affecting the welfare of the animal. So in summary, the common understanding now among animal welfare scientists is that if you want to assess the welfare of an animal, you have to ask the animal. And by asking the animal, I mean looking at its physiology, its health, and its behavior mainly. So the current understanding now is that we have to emphasize animal-based indicators. And these animal-based indicators should be, of course, valid, reliable, and feasible. That's applicable to all sorts of indicators. And ideally, they should be combined into a welfare assessment protocols that includes different indicators to cover the different aspects of animal welfare. Remember the 5 domains, so behavior, feeding, environment, health, and mental state. So as animal welfare is such a multidimensional concept, there is no way that by using a single indicator, we have information on all the different aspects. So we need several indicators, and ideally, we should combine them into a welfare assessment protocol. Now, the difficulty we face, those of us who work with wild animals, is that we do have welfare assessment protocols for domestic animals. These welfare quality assessment protocols are some of the best known and most widely used, but we don't have so many protocols for wild animals. However, the good news is that by using these protocols developed for domestic animals as a basis, as a general framework, we have been able to develop useful protocols for animals, for wild animals under human care, and likely in the wild as well. So this is some background information on the protocols we use for domestic animals, 4 principles of welfare that, if you remember the 5 domain principle and the 4 measurable domains, they coincide perfectly with these 4 principles: good feeding, good housing, good health, and appropriate behavior. And for each of these principles, we have a number of criteria. For each criteria, several indicators. So this would be the general structure of the protocols we use for domestic animals. And these protocols have been applied to some wild species as well. So this paper is a seminal paper, probably the first one that develop a welfare assessment protocol for a wild animal under human care, dolphins, the Seawell protocol, which, even though it's still not completely validated, is a useful tool, and it's clearly based on the protocols developed for domestic animals with these 4 principles, which are based on the 5 domain model. This is just a table that gives you some additional information on some of the welfare indicators that have been suggested for marine mammals in under human care. Again, the 4 principles and some of the indicators on the right-hand side column. Now, it's not just marine mammals. We recently use exactly the same approach using the framework of protocols developed for domestic animals to suggest a protocol for a terrestrial mammal, which we validated. So the approach works, and I think we have done quite a long way towards having useful tools to assess the welfare of wild animals under human care. But of course, more recently, people are suggesting, and very rightly so, that we should go beyond these existing protocols, and we should complement these protocols in 2 different ways. One is including tools to assess the overall emotional state of the animal. And the other approach to complement these protocols is using physiology. Now, as for the assessment of overall emotional state, probably the most successful approach is what we call cognitive bias. Some of you may be familiar with some of the papers looking at cognitive bias in wild animals and human care. But basically, the idea is that in both human and non-human animals, the emotional state of the individual modifies cognitive processes. So our emotional state, whether we are having a good or a bad day, has an effect, as we all know, on the way we make judgments, on the things we pay attention to, and on the things we remember. So we all know that when we are having a good day, we tend to remember good things and we pay more attention to good things rather than to bad ones. And that is what psychologists call cognitive bias. Now, one of these three types of cognitive bias has been used quite often in animals, and that is judgment bias. This is an example of a paper looking at judgment bias in dolphins and human care. And the idea is very simple. You train animals to distinguish between a stimulus, which is linked to a reward, and another stimulus, which is not linked to a reward. Now, once the animal is able to distinguish between these two clearly different stimuli, you provide the animal, you present to the animal an additional stimulus which is ambiguous. So it is halfway between the positive and the not so positive stimulus. And the question is whether the animal reacts to that ambiguity as if the ambiguous stimulus was a positive one, or as if it was a negative one. And the evidence validating this approach is now overwhelming in many animals. We know that animals we have been kept in a rich environment tend to be more optimistic. So we call them, in the sense that when presented with this ambiguous stimulus, they react as if it was a positive one, whereas animals that have been kept in a barren environment react in a more pessimistic way, and so on. So we have a lot of evidence suggesting that cognitive bias may be a useful tool to assess overall emotional state and complement these classical, if you want, protocols with different principles and indicators. Now, apart from this cognitive bias approach, I think that a very important way to complement welfare assessment protocols is by using physiology. And I would like to elaborate a little bit on why physiology is so important when assessing animal welfare. Now, the definition of animal welfare that you have now in front of you is a definition suggested by Don Broom, who used to be, is now retired, used to be professor of animal welfare at Cambridge University in the UK. And he says the welfare of an animal is its state as regards its attempts to cope with its environment. It might be a little bit cumbersome, the definition, but basically what Broom says is that animal welfare is about how well an animal copes with challenges, with difficulties. And the main idea behind is that it is not just about whether the animal is successful at coping, but also we have to consider whether coping strategies have a cost for the animal. So in other words, we may have an animal which copes in the sense that it survives and also reproduces successfully, but the adjustments in physiology and behavior that it has to do to cope end up having a cost for the animal itself. Maybe because that coping strategy decrease immune function, or maybe because the coping strategy has a negative effect on the emotional state of the animal. So basically the idea is that we could assess welfare by looking at the coping strategies of the animals and at the cost that those strategies have for the animal. And this is mainly physiology. Because many coping strategies, if not all of them, involve physiological changes. So the sort of things we would be measuring them is on one hand, the cost of coping, which could be basically immunodepression, reduction of reproductive function, and accelerated aging. There are some very nice papers looking at telomere length as a measure of welfare and chronic stress over a long period of time. So that would be one approach. We assume that animals are making an effort to cope with a difficult environment, and we look at the cost of those coping strategies. And the other approach is to look at the coping strategies themselves. And that would include, for example, looking at heart function. There is a lot of papers looking not so much at heart rate per se, but at heart rate variability. And we have validated now this approach with many domestic and some wild species as well. So a reduction in heart rate variability, it has been shown to be associated with chronic stress and poor welfare in a variety of animals. Of course, immune function, and this is a quite interesting approach, what they call leukocyte coping capacity, which is basically the ability of leukocytes to respond to a challenge. And it has been shown again that after a period of poor welfare, chronic stress, this coping capacity is reduced. Or, of course, remember that physical health is an important part of animal welfare. So looking at things such as pulmonary function may also provide very useful information about the welfare of the animal. So the idea is we have to use protocols to assess the welfare of the animals. Traditionally, those protocols have been based on what we do with domestic animals, basically an array of indicators which are grouped into these 4 principles or 4 domains: feeding, nutrition, health, and behavior. But now we suggest that this has to be complemented with more innovative approaches, basically looking at overall emotional state, cognitive bias, and some other techniques, and using physiology. Why physiology? Because welfare is about coping, the success of coping and the consequences of coping efforts. And that involves mainly physiology in 2 different ways: the coping strategies, which involve physiological changes, and the cost of coping in terms of immune function, reproduction, aging, and so on. Okay, so my last section, very briefly, is what can we learn from each other? And each other here means those of us who work with animals in the wild and those of us who work with animals under human care. And what I am suggesting is things that research in the wild is fundamentally important to improve welfare of animals under human care, and vice versa. Research in animals under human care will contribute to developing tools to assess welfare in the wild. And I would like to provide a couple of examples, one referring to behavior, the other one referring to physiology. So the example about behavior is natural behavior. And the fact is that many assessment tools developed for animals under human care refer to natural behavior. And even though it is clear that using natural behavior as a baseline to assess welfare of animals under human care has problems, natural behavior is still useful, provided that, if you look at the last 2 sentences, provided that we either know the consequences of not being able to perform the behavior, or we know how much the animal is willing to pay to perform the behavior. So in other words, how motivated the animal is to perform the behavior. Now, and it happens that these 2 requisites to assess the importance of natural behavior have to be supported by research mainly done in animals under human care. So we need that research to understand the importance of natural behavior. So the idea is that if you work with animals in the wild, you would get information about natural behavior. But then by working with animals under human care, you would be able to understand for each of those natural behaviors how important the behavior is for the welfare of the animal. And this is just a classical paper with mink. In this paper, the scientists basically were asking mink how much they were willing to pay for different resources and the possibility to perform some natural behaviors. And the idea is that the lower the number, the more important the resource is for the mink. And as you can say, and that is basically something logical, if you know about the natural history of mink, access to a water pool is something extremely important for mink. Having an alternative nest site is also very important, and a raised platform is important, but not so much. So the starting point of this study was looking at behavior of the mink in nature, and then by bringing mink into the lab, they were asking how much they were willing to pay for each of these resources, and they could then rank the importance of each resource and each behavior for the welfare of mink under human care. So the other side of the coin is that by doing research in animals under human care, we will contribute to develop tools to assess welfare in the wild. And I think this is, again, particularly relevant for those of us who work with physiology. I like to suggest that in the realm of physiology, working with animals under human care can provide very useful information on the validity of a physiological measure of welfare, sampling methodology, and recording methods. Just a couple of slides and I finish. I love this slide, really. I think that if you ask to an animal welfare scientist which physiological measure is most frequently used in the literature on animal welfare, that's going to be glucocorticoid concentration in blood. That's the classical physiological measure. And that's useful, but we have to be careful because it does have some validity issues, which are very nicely shown in this study, which was done in animals under human care, in lab animals in this particular case. I mean, if you look at the length of each bar, that is the increase in corticosterone concentration. So remember, it's a rat, so corticosterone is the main glucocorticoid. So if you look at the lower part of the drawing, everything seems to fit quite well. For example, a foot shock of 0.5 milliamperes gives rise to an increase in corticosterone. If you go higher in terms of intensity, 1 milliampere, then the increase is even higher, 2 milliamperes is even higher. So it does seem that the more intense the stressor, the more pronounced the response is. So everything fits. But then you look at the uppermost bar in the graph, and it happens that the stimulus that leads to the highest increase in corticosterone is sexual behavior. Now, this would mean that either sexual behavior is terribly bad for animal welfare, or that we have to be very careful when drawing conclusions about the welfare of an animal by looking just at cortisol or corticosterone concentration. And clearly, the second option happens to be true. So there is no evidence, as far as I know, showing that sexual behavior is bad for welfare. But the thing is that we know, thanks to these studies under control conditions, that glucocorticoids provide information on the activation of the animal rather than on the valence of the emotional state, whether it is positive or negative. So validity as something that we learn from studies done with animals under human care. Then we have information on sampling and the best samples to assess welfare and different types of stress, and many of the info we have on the characteristic of different matrices to assess the concentration of glucocorticoids in animals, so blood, saliva, feces, urine, milk, and feathers, and so on. All this comes from studies done in animals under human care, and some of these results are clearly applicable when we want to assess welfare of animals in the wild. So it's validity, but it's also information on sampling methods, and of course an area which to me is extremely promising when assessing welfare of wild animals is biologging and biosensing. And of course the validation of this methodology is something that has to be done first using animals under human care to use it in a second phase with animals in the wild. So my message here is that if we work with physiology, even if our main aim is not welfare, we can provide an incredibly useful information for in terms of animal welfare, because animal welfare is, remember, basically about coping. And coping has to do with physiological changes and their cost. And the second message is working in the wild and working with animals under human care complement each other very well, because some things we have to learn in the wild, say natural behavior, some things we have to learn with animals under human care. And finally, just a very brief summary, just, 4 ideas. Recap, animal welfare includes both physical health and emotional state of the animals. We can assess welfare using science-based indicators, so objectively. And among those, physiology is important, and it is increasingly important, coping and welfare. The concept of animal welfare is applicable to both animals in the wild and under human care, and we have to talk to each other, because research in one setting is applicable to the other. And so by working together, we can contribute more efficiently to improve animal welfare and conservation, because another important idea, I think, is that conservation and welfare are 2 sides of the same coin.